Welcome back to the channel, and today I have a very unfortunate announcement.
Unlike Philip Rivers, who just had his 10th kid this year, I've officially decided to pull out of this challenge.
I'm just having fun.
If you guys have watched my two most recent vlogs, you saw that I started a challenge to be profitable at the three main spots I play poker at, which are Capital Casino, Stones Gambling Hall, and Thunder Valley.
Capital Casino is my main spot, and just like that old 70s song who no one knows the band name of, we're taking care of business every day. And just a reminder, if you want shitty jokes with a monotone voice and a side of cringe, just hit the subscribe button and tune in every Sunday. As for Stones Gambling Hall, we started this challenge $900 in the hole in just 10 hours of play, but once we made our return, we went on an insane heater to profit over $1,600 in just under 12 hours and get our revenge. Now as for good old Thunder Valley. Before this vlog, we were down $726 in just 10 hours and 10 minutes of play, but after the conclusion of this video, I am ashamed to announce that amount has more than doubled.
But you guys probably couldn't care less about all the semantics, so let's dive into the hands and see how I more than doubled my losses in just 8 hours of play.
But before we get there, I want to announce that I'll be hosting routine $100 winner-take-all free roll tournaments on the Club GG app. I'll also have my weekly 50-cent $1 meetup game where I give away $100 to the highest stack at the end of the night. So if you want to be a part of either of those, or just grind out some cash games up to 4 tables at once like I do each night, click the Club GG link in the description and make sure to sign up using my reference code. For day 1 at Thunder Valley, we walked through the action-packed slot machines before heading into the poker room at 9 a.m., but as soon as we opened the door, the place was dead. Only 2 people were on the 1-3 list, so we had to wait over an hour before we finally had enough players to start the game at 10:15. Unlike Capital and Stones, the 1-3 is capped at a $400 max buy-in, so that's what we bought in for. Our first hand to try and make up the $726 deficit, even though I ruined the result for you guys, starts off with us seeing 3 limps from the field and looking down at Ace Queen of Hearts. Definitely a hand that I think is way ahead of a pre-flop limping range, so I raised the price of poker to $25 and 2 of the limpers put in the call. Flop comes out 9-6 deuce with 1 heart, and on a board like this, I think a range bet is in order because 2 pairs should never be represented, and if we get called, there's a lot of turn cards that we could either value bet or bluff with. So I throw out a $30 continuation bet with 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw, and just the under the gun limper puts in the call. I think he could have a ton of 9x holdings, 7-8, 5-4, or a set, and not much else. So the pot is sitting at $135 and the turn comes out the 3 of spades. He checks for a second time, and this definitely isn't a card I want to continue bluffing on because I didn't pick up any equity with the heart, 5-4 got there for the straight, and I'd have 0 fold equity against the 9. So I check it back and the river comes out the 7 of spades. Our opponent now leads out for $45, and I obviously fold our ace high and we get shown pocket 9s for top set. Definitely happy an ace or a queen didn't come on the run out or else we would have been screwed. We add on $50 to get our chip stack to the max, so we're now into the game for $450. After raising ace king and c-betting a jack 9 deuce rainbow board but getting called in 2 different spots, we give up on the 7 of clubs turn after getting bet into, so we add on another $50 to top off our stack, so we're now into the game for $500 out the gate. Next hand is an interesting one. There's 2 limps over to me and I look down at queen 10 of spades. Could just call the $3, but we have a big deficit to make up, so my goal this week is to play in some big pots. So I raise it up to $20 and just get a call from next act, going heads up to a flop of ace 10-9 with 2 spades, giving us middle pair, decent kicker, and a flush draw. I throw out a bet of $15 for a little value, and our opponent quickly puts in the call. And to give a little background of our opponent, he's the definition of an OMC. So keeping that in mind, we go to a turn and see the 7 of clubs. I don't think there's any value to be had from worse, so I decide to check it over to him, and now he bombs it for a pot-sized bet of $70. I'm pretty much just putting him on a big ace at this point, or maybe even 2 pair. I could fold since he went so large, but we have a challenge to complete, and I can't look myself in the mirror and call myself a man if I fold a pair and a flush draw. So I call, hoping for a spade, but the river comes out the 3 of hearts. I check again, and now our opponent goes all in. This guy's just never bluffing in this spot, especially since I have the two big spades blocking all his drawing hands, so I snap fold and we lose a beefy one.
Damn it!
Bluff, huh?
Bluff.
I reach into the wallet and add on another $100 to our stack, so we're already into the game for $600. We then go on a ridiculous streak of card deadness, and in super slow morning games, that's one of the most painful things a guy can endure. So I internally declared that I'm raising the next hand no matter what I'm dealt, so I click the record button to film, and the dealer tosses us over ace deuce offsuit, which honestly looks like pocket aces at this point. I raise it up to $15, and everyone folds one by one, and after 2 hours of play, we finally scoop in our first pot of the day.
Add the nuts.
We can make it straight.
Yeah, my best hand in an hour.
We finally get dealt a real hand this time when I look down at ace 10 of clubs in middle position. I usually open to $15 at the 1-3 games, but Thunder's game plays a little smaller than the others, so I decided to just open raise to $12. We only get action from the small blind, so at $20 in the pot, the flop comes out 10-8-6 with two hearts, giving us top paired top kicker. He checks it over to me, and I start off with a $15 value bet. Our opponent wastes no time before sticking in the call, and the turn comes out the deuce of diamonds, now putting two flush draws on the board. He checks again, and I size up to $35 now to charge all his draws and weaker top pairs, but our opponent mucks right away. Not the biggest pot, but we finally win a hand post-flop.
Take it.
For this next one, early position opens up to $10, and I'm on the button and look down at our first pocket pair of the day in pocket tens. I could just flat since it's been an absolute limp fest today, and seeing someone raise is rare for this group. But I like playing big pots in position, so I raise the price of poker to $30 not wanting to lose them, and he decides to put in the call. With $60 in the pot, the flop comes out Jack 4 deuce rainbow, and even though there's an overcard out there, it's important to get value from all his smaller pairs and straight draws. So I throw out a value bet of $20 and he folds immediately. I decided to show the table my hand just so they know I'm not 3-betting just aces or kings, and they'll hopefully give me action. Next up, I look down at ace jack of spades in the cutoff, and everyone folds to me. The blinds are super short stacked, so I decide to just raise to $8, hoping someone will at least call and we could play a pot in position. Button folds, but now the small blind min clicks my raise to $16. He only has about $90 in a stack, so when it folds back to me, I grab 4 green chips and put them all in. He goes in the tank and eventually decides to fold, which I was very surprised with. Either way, I'm fine with scooping in $19 of dead money without a drop.
9, and then the button says, I have pocket ace.
For this hand, I'm in the $6 straddle, and unfortunately I've been the only one straddling all morning, which isn't a good sign for action. It gets folded to the cutoff, who opens for $19, and everyone folds to me. I look down at 5-4 hearts, and I'm never folding a suited connector last act, so it's time to defend my straddle. I put in the extra $13, so we're going heads up to a flop of Jack 6-3 with 2 diamonds, giving us an open-ended straight draw. I check in flow, but the cutoff decides to check it back. Turn comes out the beautiful deuce of clubs, giving us the nut straight. Since there's a flush draw out there, I decide to throw out a small value bet of $25, but he folds right away.
Son of a bitch!
We're down over $165 at this point in the session, with not much going our way so far. There's one limp in early position, and I look down at King 9 offsuit on the button. Not the best hand, but I do have position, and these players have been super passive, so I raise the price of poker to $15. The small blind decides to stick in the call, and so does the limper. So with $45 in the pot, the flop comes out 9-6 deuce rainbow, giving us top pair with the second best kicker. Checks to me, and I throw out a $15 value bet, but now the small blind jams his short stack for $42. Folds back to me, and I snap call and turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in. Turn comes out the 7 of spades and river ace of diamonds, which isn't the best card in the deck, but our opponent looks at her hand and tosses his in the muck. Must have had a weaker 9 or 7-8 for the straight draw. For this next hand, we were late to hit the record button, but the action went as followed. Under the gun opened to $10 and 3 people put in the call before I looked down at King 10 offsuit in the big blind. I debated putting in the big bluff squeeze with this holding, but decided on the low variance route and just called the extra $7. So we went 5 ways to a flop of 10-5-3 with 2 clubs, giving us top pair second best kicker. I check it over to the pre-flop raiser, who now jams all in for $80. Folds over to me, and I'm not really loving it since this guy raised pre-flop, but I'm never folding top pair to a small all-in when there's flush draws available. So I put in the chips and turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in, and the turn comes out the 6 of hearts and river 3 of diamonds. Our opponent shakes his head and turns over Queen 10 offsuit for worst top pair, and we finally scoop in a decent sized pot. After 3 hours of straight grinding, our stack has finally climbed back up over the even mark and we're up $20. Better than losing. Next hand up, there's 1 limp and the cutoff raises to $15. He's a pretty solid player who doesn't get out of line too often, but I would say he has a wider isolating range and position like most good players should. So when I look down at ace 10 offsuit on the button, I decide to put in the 3-bet to $40, and when it folds back to him, he puts in the call. Going heads up to a flop of 9-4-3 rainbow, and when he checks it over to me, I think a c-bet is definitely in order. I throw out the same bet of $40, and he wastes no time before sticking in the call. I think his range is pretty capped to a lot of 1-pair holdings or straight draws like 6-5, ace-5, or ace-deuce. Not much else. With $160 in the pot, the turn comes out the deuce of hearts and our opponent checks again. Not really loving this card since a ton of straights like 6-5 and ace-5 get there, and all his 1-pair holdings are definitely not folding now after this card because most people put you on ace-king when you 3-bet pre-flop. So I decide to check, and the river comes out the jack of hearts, putting 3 hearts on the board, and our opponent checks for a 3rd time. I don't think betting here would make much sense since I probably would have bet all my overpairs on the turn, so I check it back and our opponent turns over the winner with pocket 7s. I think if I bombed both the turn and the river, I probably could have gotten him to fold that specific hand, but Tanaka from Major League 2 has a message for me.
Marbles! You have no marbles! Yeah, relax. Huevos?
So even though we haven't played many hands today because of card deadness, it's still important to pay attention at the table to see what's going on. There's 2 limps in the field, and the cutoff now raises to $11. Like I've mentioned in previous videos, I've never one to pick out physical tells, but sizing tells are usually apparent. This guy just made it $11 over 2 limps, and he's been raising to $15 without limps with his good hands. So keeping that in mind, action gets folded to me in the small blind, and I look down at 6-5 of diamonds. A lot of small stakes players will just call the $11 raise, but I think that's a huge mistake since I'm in the worst position possible. If our opponent opened to $15 or more, I would just toss my hand in the muck, but given that I picked up this sizing tell, it's time to make a move. So I raise the price of poker to $45, and one by one, everyone gets out of the way. Just keep an eye out for these sizing tells, but when you make these types of moves, make sure you either have blockers to good hands or a playable hand like a suited connector in case you get called. Unfortunately for us, we only played a few more hands before 2 o'clock quickly approached, which is when we always leave, so let's get to the outro.
Day 1 at Thunder was kind of a dud and the action wasn't great, and we were into the game for 600 and out for 527 for a $73 loss.
Day 2 picked up and the action was amazing at the table, but it was no thanks to the other 8 guys. I pushed the action way too hard and made some stupid plays since I was trying to make up major ground on the Thunder Valley deficit. So buckle up and enjoy the shit show. We start off day 2 at Thunder Valley calling a 3-bet with both pocket 10s and pocket 7s, but getting an ace-high board with both hands and forced to fold. So to continue the theme this week, we're adding on $100 immediately, so we're already into the game for $500. Next hand up, the $6 straddle is on and the button decides to just call. I look down at ace-jack offsuit and raise it up to $26. Straddle puts in the call, but surprisingly the button gets out of the way. So with $50 on the pot, the flop comes out king deuce deuce with 2 spades. We obviously don't connect, but I think this is a pretty strong board to start off with a bet and try to represent since we have all the strong king X hands in our range. So I throw out a $15 bet and our opponent puts in the call. Don't expect him to fold any of his pairs or obviously any of his flush draws yet to this small bet, so when the turn comes out the 5 of hearts, it's decision time. Should I check and give up or keep the pressure going and put our opponent to the test? I'm not really one for ever giving up, so I throw out a $55 bet to get our opponent to fold all his pairs and smaller flush draws, but now he raises to 125. Seems a little fishy since he's basically saying he has a hand like ace king or ace deuce that didn't raise pre-flop, but unless I have a strong showdown value hand, I will always default to folding the turn raises against non-aggressive opponents. After playing just 3 hands post-flop, we add on another $100 and we're into the game for $600 total. The $6 straddle is on for this one and everyone folds to me on the button. I look down at 6-5 offsuit, and if there were aggressive players in the blinds, I would just toss my hand in the muck, but I'm stuck and need to play some big pots to get our Thunder revenge and get positive in 2024. So I open the action to $16 and we get calls from both the small blind and the straddler. With $45 in the pot, the flop comes out 9-8-7 with 2 hearts, giving us the flop straight. They check it over to me, and on this connected of a board, I decide to throw out a value bet of $35, and just the under the gun straddler puts in the call. I'm almost certain we have the best hand since we didn't get raised on the flop, so we're hoping for a blank to keep value betting on the turn, but unfortunately we see the 6 of spades giving any 10 a straight now. He checks again, and I don't think betting's a good idea now. Since he just called my flop bet, I think he has a ton of 10x hands that now have us beat. I also think he probably would have raised his sets and big 2 pairs, so if I bet, I don't think I'd get called by worse. So given that, I decide to check it back and the river comes out the deuce of spades, but surprisingly our opponent checks to us for a 3rd time. I think we can count out his 10x hands that have us beat, so I think he either has a missed flush draw or some type of weak 2 pair. Because of that range, I implement something I've only done once all year, which is throw out a blocker bet of $25. This bet accomplishes a couple things. If our opponent misses draw, he might be incentivized to raise since that's the only way he could win the pot, or if he has a weak 1 pair holding, he might look us up light since I'm giving him such good pot odds. He eventually decides to put in the call, and I turn over the weakest straight possible, but our opponent tosses his hand in the muck.
I flopped the straight, but then it got even worse.
For this hand, there's 2 limps to me, and I look down at 10-9 of hearts. I could just overlimp and try and see a cheap flop, but I'm stuck just under $300 and need to play big pots to complete the challenge. So I raise it up to $18 and we get 3 callers. Going 4 ways to a flop of Jack 8-3 with 1 heart, giving us an open-ended straight draw and a backdoor flush draw. Small blind now leads out for a pot-sized bet of $70. He has yet to bluff all session, so he's got at least a jack and maybe even 2 pair. One of my biggest pet peeves in poker is paying off calling stations, especially when I'm not getting a good price to hit my draw. So the best decision is to grab my cards and toss them in the muck. But we're not about making good decisions today since we have this challenge to complete. I would usually just fold and move on after our opponent bets this big, but it's time to gamble and test our luck. I put our opponent all in for $335 to make sure we see a complete run out, and our opponent snap calls. I turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in, and our opponent turns over Jack 8 of hearts for top 2 pair with a better backdoor flush draw. If we check out the graphic, we're in terrible shape, but we kind of knew what we were getting ourselves into. The good news is if we hit a queen or a 7, we'll finally be positive today and get 1 step closer to completing this challenge. Dealer burns and turns and puts out the 5 of spades, which is no help to us, and the river comes out the deuce of hearts.
For the first time ever anywhere, the 45th.
Nothing to do than just keep adding on money to get our stack to the max, so I add on $200 and we're now into the game for $800. For this one, there's 1 limp and middle position opens to $13. I'm on the button and look down at King 10 offsuit and decide to put in the call. Limper calls as well, so we're going 3 ways to a flop of Ace King 7 rainbow. Limper checks, and now the early position raiser decides to slow down and check. Could throw out a small bet, but with middle pair, I decided to just check it back. Turn is an interesting one, and the 10 of spades giving us 2 pair. First player checks, and now the middle position player throws out a pretty hefty bet of $55. Just in case he was trapping on the flop or improved to a straight, I decided to just put in the call in position and see what he does on the river. Other player gets out of the way, so we're going heads up to a river, which comes out the 3 of diamonds. I was expecting our opponent to either check or throw out a half pot bet that we could easily just call, but that's not what he does. Instead, he grabs a big stack of red chips and $100 worth of green and throws out a massive overbet of $200. Definitely not the best spot to be in since it's hard to even make 1 pair, let alone 2. I go in the tank and try to figure out what he's doing with this bet. The only value hand I beat is ace queen, and I don't think he'd take this size with just 1 pair, so I'm putting him on 2 pair at worst. So that logic led me to tossing my hand in the muck, and our opponent turns over ace 3 of hearts for the river 9 outer. That one hurt because it could have gotten us a lot closer to the even mark, but I'm just glad we made the right decision and folded a pretty strong hand. Since we're already in for 8 $100 bills, what's another one? I trade a $100 bill for chips, and we're now into the game for $900 total. Next hand to note, I raise king 10 of diamonds to $15, and the small blind, who's the same player we doubled up earlier, puts in the call. Going heads up with our rival of the day to a 10-8-3 2-club board, giving ourselves top pair second best kicker. He checks, and I throw out a $20 bet for value that he quickly calls. He plays a pretty wide range and calls light, so we could have any of the pairs on this board and a ton of draws. We're looking for a blank so we could keep value betting, but the turn comes out the jack of hearts. And to make matters worse, our opponent goes all in for $300 into a pot of 70. Don't really see a bluff with this sizing, so I decided to toss my hand in the muck, and our opponent officially has our number after turning over 9-7 offsuit for the turn straight.
Like 1 for 25.
For this next hand, I need you guys to buckle up because shit's about to get crazy. Action gets folded to the hijack, who opens to $10. It's the first hand he's raised in 3 hours, so I'm pretty sure it's a monster. Something like jacks plus or ace king. I'm next to act and look down at 5-4 diamonds in the cutoff, which is the perfect holding to crack those big hands. So I put in the call, and when it folds to the big blind, he now 3-bet squeezes to $45. He's also a player that leans on the tighter side, and a 3-bet from the big blind is almost always a monster because he had the option to act last and just call for $12 more, but instead he 3-bet out of position. So I'm basically giving him the same range, jacks plus and ace king. The original raiser just calls the $45, and I should be folding this since we're not that deep, but we have position and we have a challenge to complete, so I stick in the call. With $135 in the pot, the flop comes out jack 9 deuce with 2 diamonds, giving us a small flush draw. The big blind continues the aggression, but he bombs it for an overbet of $185. So take ace king out of the picture, he's basically saying he has queens, kings, or aces and nothing else. And the action gets even crazier because the hijack goes all in for $193. Unless he has ace king of diamonds specifically, I think he has the same range as the big blind, but with jacks, queens, kings, and aces. So if we give each of our opponents an overpair, we're actually in decent shape. Since the hijack jammed all in for only $8 more, the only thing the big blind can do is call. So after analyzing all this in my head, I eventually put in the chips for a call, and the big blind calls as well. So the pot is absolutely ballooned to $714. There's only one suit in the deck I'm looking for, but that's not what we get when the turn is a very interesting card in the ace of hearts. I say that because the big blind now slows down and checks it over to us. So either he hit top set with pocket aces and isn't worried about much, or he's scared of the ace with a hand like kings or queens. If we were heads up, I would take my chances and go all in to try and steal the pot, but since there's $0 in the side pot and an opponent already all in the main pot with presumably a very good hand, we have zero incentive to bluff because we have to beat the all-in player. So I'm just happy to check it back so we could see a free river, and not only are we looking for a diamond, but we picked up additional equity, and any 3 gives us a straight. If neither of them have a set, we have 12 outs to win, but we get no help when the river peels off the 6 of hearts. Big blind checks again, and I wave the white flag and check it back. Big blind ended up having pocket queens, and hijack had pocket kings for the winner. Our gamble didn't pay off, but it was a risk I needed to take given the hands I was up against.
Nice hand, nice.
After getting smoked in another massive pot, we added on another $100, so we're into a capped 1-3 game for $1,000 total. But unfortunately, I only played a couple more insignificant pots before 2 p.m. hit, which is when we always leave. So let's get to the outro.
Day 2 at Thunder was an absolute shit show. Couldn't hit any of my draws in those massive pots, but I honestly didn't deserve to because I shouldn't have been in there in the first place. In for 1,000 and out for 330 for a $670 loss.
It sucks having to admit we didn't complete the revenge challenge and get profitable at all 3 locations yet, but the game times at Thunder Valley are just not ideal for our schedule. But I'm super excited to head back to our main spot at Capital Casino and get back in on the action. And as always, I hope you guys run good at the tables, and I'd appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button to help me reach my new year-end goal of 10,000 subscribers.